What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button, and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
Squeaking and squeaking. We already told you once before about why attachment belts whistle and squeak. I will not repeat myself, just briefly remind you, only belts can whistle for a second or two immediately after starting the engine. There is nothing absolutely terrible in it, but it is better to plan in advance the replacement of the belt. It is either stretched or has already begun to dubit from age. All kinds of aerosols for belts help only conditionally. They can soften the belt a little and briefly remove this unpleasant whistling, removing greasy deposits and increasing the grip of the belt with the rollers. Then it will in any case return back, so it is better not to bring the situation to the breakage and change the belt in advance. Well, we'll get back to more interesting sounds. And let's start with what sounds can be produced directly by the motor. Rattle or knock. The cause of a crackling sound immediately after starting the engine is usually a dying phase shifter. Its characteristic sound is hard to confuse with anything else. What to do? First, think about why it crackles. It is worth to search data on the web about your car. Some models and even brands do not have relations with phase shifters for some reason, and they have to be replaced or repaired quite often. But on most cars, phase shifters usually work for a long time, for them 150 and 200,000 kilometers of mileage. It is not always a verdict, and if they fail early, there is reason to think about the oil. Either you're changing it too infrequently, or you're not using a very good one, or there's some problem with its pressure. If you think that in Moscow traffic jams it is enough to change oil once in 15,000 kilometers, as dealers often advise, then death of a phasic should not be surprised. It tried its best, but became a victim of marketers. Theoretically, it is possible to drive with an inoperative phase shifter. Yes, the car will not pull normally, check engine may light up, fuel consumption will increase, but you can drive to the replacement. It is worse if the engine starts knocking when starting. Knocking directly at startup is very rare. More often the motor may knock until it is fully warmed up. This is quite common on modern engines due to their design features. Most often, because of short piston skirts, which are used solely for environmental reasons and in terms of reducing fuel consumption. It should be noted that some motors can drive with such a knock tens of thousands of kilometers completely painlessly. For example, numerous Volkswagen motors of EA111 family and to a slightly lesser extent, EA211. If some Saha or one of its relatives does not eat oil, you should not worry before time, they were invented that way. The short piston skirt shifting sound for 2.0 and 2.4-liter Korean engines is a very bad sign. Almost always this knock means at least the beginning of scoring. However, there is no way to change something here you can't do without repair, and probably very soon. And fashionable advanced installation of additional oil nozzles for cooling the pistons does not always help, although in today's conditions is not cheap. By the way, the sound of shifting on cold in some motors, in particular, Korean, can be confused with the sound of injectors or unadjusted timing. The latter is more manifested under low load on cold and throttle up, answering the question, what can knock or crack immediately? After starting, we just go to the timing. In chain motors it is, as a rule, the timing chain itself. The cause of knocking is the same, insufficient tension, either due to stretching of the chain itself, or due to incorrect operation of the tensioner. The chain usually knocks on the chain cover, but it happens that it starts to make noise when starting the engine and in the area of the tensioner and calipers. She is lucky, there is something to knock on. If there is a suspicion that the crackling is coming from the chain, it is not worth delaying with checking and eliminating the trouble. You can drive to a chain slip with a very likely Stalingrad meeting of valves and pistons, or to a breakage at all, which is very rare, but theoretically quite likely. In any case, repairing the consequences will be much more expensive than eliminating its cause. What and how to check? The universal method is to check the gas distribution phases with a scanner. A little obvious, since the chain drives the camshafts from the star of the crankshaft, the desynchronization of their position will be noticeable immediately. A less universal, but very good way is to visually assess chain tension. It is not necessary to remove the chain cover for this purpose. On some motors it is possible to see how far the tensioner rod is extended. On the rod there are marks, by the number of which you can understand whether the chain is still alive or has already stretched so much that the tensioner cannot cope with the work. By the way, if the knocking of the chain disappears very quickly, its weak tension may not be to blame, but just the tensioner. There are examples of unsuccessful hydraulic tensioners in history, for example, in the same EA111 and EA113 engines in Volkswagen, M276 in Mercedes, some V6 in Audi, which, after the engine was stopped, expired oil, lost pressure and weakened the chain. If this is the case, you're in luck. It's much cheaper to repair or replace it than to replace the entire timing chain set. Sometimes you need to change the check valves that maintain oil pressure for starting. And for the future, again, we can advise you to change the oil more often. The hydraulic tensioner is not as fussy about oil as the phase shifter, but it likes it clean too. Another cause of engine knocking immediately after starting is incorrect valve clearances. There are two options here. If there are no hydrocompensators in the valve train, it is time to go for valve adjustment. If there are hydrocompensators, then the knocking indicates that they do not work. Here a lot depends on what exactly happened to the hydrix. Sometimes as it warms up, the knock, it will be a characteristic rather ringing socket from under the valve box cover, can disappear. But this does not mean that the motor is fine. It means that there is a violation of the thermal clearance of the valve, which must necessarily be eliminated. And lastly, on diesel engines, the cause of knocking after starting can be a malfunction of fuel equipment, first of all, the injector. If it is leaking, on a cold engine it may look like a knocking, or hard work, immediately after starting the engine. As it warms up, the knock may become quieter, but you should not start this case. Leakage of the diesel injector is a direct path to valve burnout. Let's mention the most unpleasant and expensive noise variant. If after starting the engine there is a frank and strong knocking noise, which is especially intensified when the throttle is released, it is almost certainly the line is turning. Here you can't do with little blood. It is obligatory to open the motor, defect analysis and not cheap repair. And if it is not the motor, under the hood there are several other potential sources of nasty squeaks, buzzes and knocks when starting the engine. Experienced car owners will immediately remember one of them, loud buzzing when the starter is turned on instead of the standard start. And of course, they will name the cause of disorder. It is a malfunction of the starter retracting coil. Its pinion has not entered the connection with the flywheel crown. The starter needs to be cleaned at least, at most repaired. In rare cases, the flywheel crown is to blame, but if this ever happens in life, then only on a car with a mileage of, I do not know, a few 100,000 kilometers. Loud clicks during starter engagement. It is also him, the starter itself. But not through its own fault, but through the fault of a dead battery. As an option, bad en masse, but much less often. Needless to say, there are very boring sources of extraneous noise after starting the engine. It's all the bearings of additional equipment. But this is a little bit not our topic. This sound, squeak, less often a quiet hum or even rhythmic clicks, also either stays for the entire time of warming up the engine, or does not disappear and on the warmed up. I would like to tell you about one sound separately. We searched for its cause for a long time, but we found it only on the hoist. One of the brackets of the exhaust suspension system was torn off. And it is difficult to see it. The front subframe interferes. And, most interestingly, the sound appeared only when starting the engine and sounded as if someone was banging a hammer several times on an iron barrel somewhere in the driver's feet. There was no such sound on the move. Apparently, at the moment of starting, at the moment when the pistons started to move, there was some such moment of forces, with the direction of which the motor supports could not cope. The case, of course, is very individual, but interesting. In lieu of a conclusion, of course, not all extraneous noise refers to dangerous sounds. But if it is difficult to find its cause, it is better to contact the service. Sometimes a slight crackling noise from the alternator or a few seconds of clicks from the accelerator pump immediately after starting the engine will warn the owner of a malfunction in advance, allowing him to take the necessary measures. It is not worth ignoring such warnings. It will be more expensive. In conclusion, being attentive to the sounds your engine makes during startup can be crucial in identifying potential issues before they escalate into major problems. Remember to listen for any unusual noises such as knocking, grinding, or excessive rattling, as these can indicate underlying malfunctions. Regular maintenance and early detection can save you time and money in the long run. Stay vigilant and ensure your vehicle remains in optimal condition for safe and reliable driving. Thank you for watching and drive safely.